The 60s spy movies were all about design.
For me, the style and costuming and production design of the Flint films is very much an attempt to be as stylish and up-to-date as they possibly can, and to recognize that the world is changing around them.
It is a new world we offer, Mr. Flint.
There's almost a hermetically sealed world that's created by the super spy genre. The Flints were borrowing thematically from musicals and science fiction and feeding those into the look of the movie.
Saul David was very much interested in making sure the films were designed in a particular type of way.
He was quite intellectual on his approach. It was really his, he did it.
Saul David went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and he worked as a portrait painter and a muralist until World War II broke out. So he had a strong background in visual design.
In the mid-1960s, Jack Martin Smith was in charge of the art department at 20th Century Fox.
Saul David worked very closely with Jack Martin Smith and the art directors specifically assigned to both of the Flint films.
Saul David had been extremely impressed with a sketch illustrator for the film Von Ryan's Express named Ed Graves. And it was Ed Graves who was given a good chunk of the film's $4.1 million budget to try to realize the world of Derek Flint.
Perhaps nudes aren't your dish of tea.
Everything was coordinated, from sets to hair and makeup to wardrobe. Ed Graves worked very closely with Ray Aguian, who did the wardrobe.
I work very close with set designers. You have to. That is my job. If I'm going to dress all of you in something that's going to play against that wall, I better know what color that wall is, shouldn't I?
Ray Aguian is a wonderful figure. He grew up in Iran and then came to the United States and began working at 20th Century Fox in the 1960s.
Working at Fox at that time, it was wonderful. You get kind of known around a studio, you know. At the same time, I was doing Doris Day Pictures. I really had a home at 20th Century Fox.
He loved the creative freedom that he had. He loved the ability to design people who were moving through everyday life almost as though they were walking down a fashion runway.
The sets and the costumes, it all comes together to create a real studio atmosphere. It feels like it could come from a Hollywood musical or a Doris Day movie, from one of these Fox movies of the time. And the effect that that has is an interesting one because James Coburn is playing a very forward-thinking character. Derek Flint is certainly a youth movement sort of spy, as opposed to Bond, who's part of Clubland.
I had to make him look different from Bond. I mean, I had no choice. Even though he was playing somebody who's very cool, I pushed him toward warm colors.
Some of his outfits, no one could have pulled off but James Coburn. He actually makes them work.
He's like a drawing, like a sketch. He was just wonderfully lanky, taller than normal, and he's divided correctly. He doesn't have short legs and long body, or vice versa. No, they're all the right length they should be. Also, he had a wonderful color to him, all in the shades of browns.
He knew this was a man who could wear a turtleneck better than any other actor working in Hollywood in that era.
And sometimes you actually get outfits that blend into the walls behind him. Sometimes you get ones that pop out very distinctively. But it's all coordinated.
And this was something that Jack Martin Smith was a big believer in over at Fox. He felt that films themselves should have a very color-coordinated look. That when audiences were going in to see something fantastic, that if you gave them a sense of homogeny within the design, that if everything seemed to mesh, you could get away with almost anything outlandish in the plot.
He's such a swinging guy, you know, such a very 1960s person, modern at the time, that he almost pops right out of those sets. The first Flint movie is actually surprisingly stagey. And that comes in part from the director Daniel Mann and his background in things like Butterfield 8 and much more dramatic non-action pieces.
Our man Flint kept everything framed and tamped down.
You can really tell Our Man Flint is a studio-made film. There's a scene where Flint and his harem of girls are escaping from the volcano base toward the end of the film. And this boulder hits one of the women on the head, and she barely even flinches. Nobody's truly in danger here.
You can see how absurd they were willing to get with the production design at Galaxy headquarters when you see that one of the places that the female pleasure units are supposed to be pleasuring the men is in a fake drive-in movie theater filled with cars that are made just for seduction.
Graves took 2 acres of 20th Century Fox's Malibu Ranch and he converted it into a tropical paradise. For all the backgrounds of the Galaxy Island set, those were all matte paintings and they were all designed by L.B. Abbott, who was the special effects designer at 20th Century Fox at that time.
When he's in his apartment, that is a Fox apartment from the 1960s. And I actually love it for the fact that it's so stagey.
That emphasis on design goes all the way through the film. When Gila opens the cold cream jar to set a bomb inside, the bomb is this beautiful, round, clear plastic thing with shining lights and moving parts that fits perfectly into the jar. It's just a masterful little moment of design application right there, because in the real world, it would be an imperfect fit. You would have to find a way to hide a bomb in there. They were made for each other. And it's not just the visual, but also the sound design, down to the smallest detail of Flint's watch. The watch itself has this beautiful, sleek science fiction design with a flashing light. And when the little toggle comes out and begins to hit his pulse, the sound effect is just a perfect little science fiction moment in the middle of this spy film. And it's all design. It's all put together that way.
Fox as a studio was kind of known for swapping out sets and props between different series and different movies. Flint was no exception. To save money, they decided to use sets from another Saul David movie that was in the midst of a very long shoot owing to its special effects, Fantastic Voyage.
So the offices for the Zowie headquarters were redressed from Fantastic Voyage sets. And then in the background, some of the sparkling curtains were Benish's brain.
The sets were great and the clothes were great. The dance scene, I'm dancing with James Coburn, and I loved the gown that I wore in Our Man Flint. It was a brown, long chiffon, strapless gown with red, white, and blue chiffon from the bodice, which was kind of strange, but it also worked as, a veil in the movie, in the dancing scenes. And just as I pulled it back, it attached itself to an extra's wig. And as I bring my hand back, I've got her hair in my hand. And the girl is screaming because she's got this, hairnet kind of thing on her head and looks really weird, So they yelled cut, and we all died laughing and everything, and I thought that would be the end of it. But Saul kept it and ran it for everybody. And every time somebody'd go in to, see the rushes, he'd be showing, us dancing and this woman's hair coming off.
You can see the change in the 2 Flint films just by looking at the 2 title sequences. There are the requisite solarized images of nude women dancing in the titles of Our Man Flint. Nothing is particularly visible. By 1967, when In Like Flint is coming out, the restrictions on nudity had largely been lifted.
In Like Flint goes completely wild in its sexual politics.
Something that I'm certain was welcomed by the adolescent boys who went and saw the film in its original release.
There's an explosion of the id, setting up the whole theme of this space-age island of Lesbos in the Virgin Islands.
In Like Flint brings back a similar type of look as Our Man Flint. The color coordination between the costumes and the production design is very evident throughout the film. But this time, Ray Aguian, who's the costume designer, was working with Dale Hennessy, a different art director. Dale Hennessy went on to become a very acclaimed production designer. He got to know Saul David during the production of Fantastic Voyage, a film that was virtually totally created from its production design. David was very impressed with his versatility and at keeping costs low on that film. Hennessy worked very closely with Ray Aguian to create a very modern, stylish, homogenized chromatic look.
Ray Aguian really studies the person. He was wonderful, and boy, what an eye he had. What an eye he had. And there wasn't anybody better than him at that time.
If you watch the film, she never wears anything except white. Everything she wears is white.
And I said, I'd love to have her wear a great big hat. And he said, oh, and he went out and got the best hat. I wish I'd kept it.
Another contribution that Saul David brings to the Flint films is an understanding of how to sell the movie. He brings in a renowned illustrator named Bob Peak to do the movie posters. What he does for the Flint films is created a movie poster that was irresistible.
His images for Flint are some of the definitive spy imagery out there.
It brought all the level of sort of masculinity and sexuality and wildness of design that totally tapped into what audiences wanted to see at the time.
And you really see them working to try to create some kind of new style here that will go beyond anything that's been done in the James Bond films and really make these films kind of leap off the screen at the audience.
The studio previewed Our Man Flint in late September 1965, and they knew immediately they had a hit on their hands. They immediately went and said, let's start writing the next film.
It was announced that James Coburn would return in F as in Flint.
Later changed to F for Flint, and then, of course, finally released as In Like Flint.
Which I think is a much better title, but Coburn certainly didn't. He was never happy with that title, thought it was terrible. Hal Finberg is announced as the writer of the sequel, who had written the original spec script, Cartel of Evil, that became Our Man Flint. Of course, Ben Starr had been brought on to flesh out Our Man Flint. He's not involved in the sequel.
Saul called me and he wanted me to write it. And I said, fine, but, I want to raise. After all, I did my share. He said, well, we ran into trouble on Our Man Flint with Coburn's wardrobe. All those suits and everything, they cost more than the budget called for. Flint spent more money for clothes, so you don't want to give me a raise? I said, there's no way I do this. And Saul said, are you aware that you are piquing me? I said, so I'm piquing you.
For the Flint sequel, Hal Finberg took the opportunity to reach back into his Cartel of Evil script to pull out a couple of key elements for the film. One being a gadget, an oscillating ray, which could destroy solid matter.
As soon as Project Damocles is complete, we shall return.
Project Damocles.
Project Damocles.
Project Damocles, launching a weapon into space to hold the planet hostage. That was also lifted out of Cartel of Evil.
Daniel Mann doesn't return to direct In Like Flint.
He had sort of a superstition, or even just the idea that the sequel could never be as good, but I don't remember him feeling like, I didn't get, In Like Flint. I think he moved on to his next project.
Instead, they bring in Gordon Douglas.
When he was 6 years old, living in Brooklyn, his neighbor Maurice Costello would get him bit parts at the Vitaphone studios.
So he's been working in movies for a very long time.
Saul David and James Coburn wanted somebody who was a little more of an agreeable director, an amicable director. And they found this person in Gordon Douglas.
He had earned a reputation for working with potentially difficult actors, but getting a film in on time and on budget.
He's also the only director on record to have worked with both Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley.
He did a film for the Bond film producers, Call Me Buono, which was the movie that they made immediately after Dr. No, before they started making From Russia with Love. It was a Bob Hope and Nita Ekberg comedy, and it actually had a scene that parodied a sequence in Dr. No. So Gordon Douglas had already done a Bond spoof.
Part of that seismic shift in tone between Our Man Flint and In Like Flint is reflected in the directors behind the camera.
Gordon Douglas is a big fan of the long take, and there's a number of fight scenes in the movie where we actually get to see the fight play out toward the end of the movie, where Flint has a fight in a gymnasium and actually uses the parallel bars, uses all of the various gymnastics equipment. We see it all play out. I'm sure there's a stuntman involved in various parts of it, but it's hard to tell because you actually see a lot of James Coburn in there because the camera is on him for so long. There's none of this quick cutting like today's movies have where you can't tell what's going on. You actually get to see the punches thrown, see the bad guys flying through the air, see what's happening.
Buzz Henry was the stuntman and stand-in for James Coburn in both of the Flint films and had himself a panther-like grace. Sometimes credited to Coburn, perhaps unjustly.
It's definitely Buzz Henry's influence that has this swashbuckling sense about the Flint movies. He was a real tall, lanky guy, the same build as Coburn, and he ended up doubling a lot of actors with that build, which was usually in cowboy movies, and he was a cowboy himself, Buzz Henry.
Buzz was also second unit director, and for In Like Flint, he graduated to a featured role as the military attaché to General Carter.
Cooper, you and Austin take Mr. Crandon to the car. I'll stay and question the woman.
I never...
This way, sir.
Henry, unfortunately, died at a very young age. He was 40 years old, and he was killed in a motorcycle accident while shooting a film.
Buzz Henry was also one of my dad's dearest friends. In Like Flint, which was filmed in Jamaica, we all went down there, rented a house, and had a wonderful time. It felt like family to us. Every night we would have dinner on our back terrace, and Buzz would join us, and whoever else was invited. And we'd have a fireworks show. I thought that this town in Jamaica had fireworks every night. I found out it was my mother was buying the fireworks and putting on these amazing fireworks shows every night. We had a great time.
They shot at Round Hill, which is a resort in Jamaica that had been founded by a group of investors, including Noel Coward. Round Hill was very close to Montego Bay, which had a major airport, made it very easy for the filmmakers to fly in and out of.
Location shooting in Jamaica opens up the film considerably from the more studio-bound settings of the first film.
Catherine Deneuve had originally been considered for the lead role in Like Flint, but Saul David had seen a film called The Oscar and had been really impressed with Jean Hale.
She's a beautiful strawberry blonde.
Stunningly gorgeous. She had appeared in television on The Wild Wild West.
Saul David went into Dick Zanuck and said, okay, Mr. Zanuck, you pick the leading lady for Our Man Flint, and I want to pick the leading lady for In Like Flint. Dick Zanuck wanted Catherine Deneuve, who wouldn't, right? Deep down, he knew who he wanted. So Saul started interviewing. I think every actress in town went up on this. I even think I heard Natalie Wood went up for it, and everybody. And Saul wanted someone who wasn't a name, who hadn't been established, and he wanted somebody who'd been educated. I never finished 4 years of college, much to my father's chagrin. So my father kept saying you have to have at least 2 years of college, and if I hadn't had that college background, I wouldn't have had a prayer. See, it was about 2 weeks before shooting, and Saul David said, I'm leaving for Jamaica. If the right Lisa walks through the door on the first shot, you've got your producer. If she doesn't, I'm leaving. I'm gone. I'm out of here. And then I got that call about 10 minutes after that from William Morris saying, you got the part.
Hello, Mr. Flint.
So he literally went on the line for me. I am grateful to Saul, and we were friends, and he was someone that I don't think there's ever been the likes of him that came to Hollywood.
The gimmick was going to be that she was going to wear a lot of disguises throughout the movie and get to show off her various accents. She ends up only really doing one disguise, but does it very well. She poses as a school teacher for Lee J. Cobb.
I said I wanted to really look like a school teacher. Here's how great Saul was. I said, I don't want to look all dolled up again. I said, can I look like a school teacher? And he said, well, remember, it's a Bond kind of movie, so, you still have to look good. So I said, well, let me have a bun. Let me try it. I'll go get a bun and glasses, and let me be from Roanoke. Let me have a Southern accent.
Oh, dear.
Allow me.
Why, thank you. How awful of me. Oh, no. How terribly clumsy.
So I went and got my hair done and got some stills shot, and they liked it, so they let me do it.
My trip here has to be a very short one. School teachers are not in the higher income brackets.
Then they wanted me to be semi-nude in the scene when she takes him back to the hotel and sets him up for the photograph. You're talking about 1966 or whenever it was, and that just was something I couldn't do. So he said, well, we'll just have to get a double for you. And yet they got someone quite a bit older and kind of tough, and I said, why didn't you hire someone that looked a little bit more like me? At least our bodies weren't the same or anything. And I never got the answer. Maybe he had something he was trying to say with that.
Pardon me, dear.
Wait a minute. I don't know.
That in itself is pretty strange. But on closer inspection, the floozy really does appear to be a man in a wig.
Finberg has a whole notion of gender-bending things coming up, including Cramden dressing in drag.
Welcome to Fabulous Face, Mrs. Hiller.
You've got women dressing as boys, men dressing as women, lesbian islands. The film is generally perverse.
If ever there was a film that ended up on the wrong side of history, it's In Like Flint, with its mocking of the idea of women in power.
What you don't manage, you control. What you don't control, you influence. What you don't influence, you probably one day will inherit.
That's very well put, Mr. Flint.
Saul David said that In Like Flint derived philosophically from Ashley Montague's The Natural Superiority of Women.
This is how the name Ashley even becomes a girl's name. It's based on this guy. You can actually see some of Montague's research delivered as dialogue by the three women who are trying to rule the world.
Face it, Mr. Flint, we women are outliving you. The wealth of this country, of the world, is concentrated in our dishpan hands. In the laboratories, our reflexes are quicker than yours, our manual dexterity 20% higher, and our patience a damn sight longer.
Saul David said it was a send-up of the women's movement before there was one.
And Flint's reaction is sort of cringeworthy.
Women running the world. Oh, you can't. Well, now you can't be serious.
Why not, Mr. Flint?
Yes, why not?
Flint points out to them that if you're brainwashing people, it's not really your movement.
There's something wrong with these girls.
There's sort of a hypersexual critical mass that's reached by the end of the film. And Flint appears to be the only person unscathed by all of this. He's just, because he's Flint. Whatever strange battle is going on between men and women, he stands aside from it.
Flint did survive, and he was the man of the future, too.
Tell me something. What is it about you that makes you so irresistible to women?
It's very simple. I don't compete with them.
In Like Flint did very well. It was Fox's fourth highest grossing movie of the year.
In Like Flint actually made $1 million in profit, which at that time was not shabby.
And they managed to bring it in for essentially the same amount of money. It made a very nice profit for them, so it would seem like a series was born, a franchise. Where's the third one?
Coburn was beginning his own production deals and was interested in moving on from the Flint movies.
Basically, the first film was creating the character, and the second film was replaying the character. The challenge was really gone. He knew that he could do it and it would work, and doing it again was not that interesting to him.
Frankly, the need just wasn't there. You had hundreds of spy films, counting all the European versions.
Where the Italians produced their own parody of Our Man Flint called Il Vostro Superagente Flit, which parodied specific scenes from Our Man Flint, as well as bringing in that crazy Martian element from the original Cartel of Evil script.
In America, you actually got some Flint imitators right off the bat. There was a movie called Dimension 5, which had a hero named Justin Power, who was clearly supposed to be more of a Flint than a Bond, another know-it-all. And there was another movie called A Man Called Dagger. The actor Paul Manty, who plays Dagger, he has all the know-it-all qualities of Flint, but none of the charm. And you just want to hit him every time he says something. On TV, you have The Avengers, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Mission Impossible, I Spy, Wild Wild West. The spy craze was already starting to die down by the late 60s.
Fox never fully lets go of Flint. There is a legend that they were considering developing a television series, and Harlan Ellison had written the pilot script for that with an episode title of Flint Locked. Nothing ever came of it. Eventually in the 70s, probably with the transfer of Matt Helm to television with Tony Franciosa, Fox decided to get back into the game with a Our Man Flint dead-on target.
Flint was played this time not by James Coburn, but by an actor named Ray Danton, who had made a number of spy knockoffs in the 60s, and he had a terrible haircut.
Derek Flint has somehow evolved from independent super spy to security analyst.
I'll see you as soon as I get back. Goodbye, Miss Norton.
Goodbye, Mr. Flint.
You do see the influence of Flint beginning to crop up as the young fans move into show business themselves.
The Austin Powers movies certainly brought a new audience to the Flint movies through their own references to that, down to the ringtone. That distinctive ringtone that signifies a call from the president coming into Lloyd Cramden's office. Probably more people know it as the Austin Powers ringtone than the Flint ringtone today. But it's also turned up in other places over the years, including Hudson Hawk.
The Galaxy assassin Hans Gruber, played by Michael St. Clair. Hans Gruber was later used in Die Hard as the name of the villain. Bruce Willis was a huge Flint fan, so much so that following Die Hard, in Hudson Hawk, he cast James Coburn in the film itself.
He and Bruce got along famously, and they enjoyed working together. He had a great time. He really did.
One of the best moments in Hudson Hawk has Coburn declaring, "I miss the communists." And it's a clear allusion to his time served as a spy in the 60s in the Flint movies. He actually sends himself up very nicely in that movie.
It's very interesting.
We love the Flint films because we all love a rebel, but mostly it's the confidence of these films.
He's really very clever.
He's your #1 hero.
That's right, he's Flint!
Saul David was a brilliant man who also at the same time was his own worst enemy.
When somebody has a track record like Saul David developed at Fox, you would think he would be the primary studio producer.
He would turn out a hit movie and you figure, wow, that's the place to be. And in 2 minutes, he would have isolated the bosses of the studio.
He becomes more and more of an individualist as he develops his career in Hollywood, and he becomes more and more upset when anybody tinkers around with his movies.
By the time In Like Flint was being made, David's own hard-headedness was putting him at odds with Zanuck and the other executives at 20th Century Fox.
Richard Zanuck was a very important person in Fox history, especially during the early 1960s. He was the son of Darrell F. Zanuck, and it was Richard Zanuck who was the primary person, along with his father, who was put in charge after the financial debacle, which was Cleopatra. He was the one put in charge of trying to rescue Fox from this dark, dark period of its history.
Saul David had a final cut of the film that he liked and screened for Zanuck. In it were two elements that Zanuck wanted immediately removed. One was a speech Flint had with the female leaders of the world-conquering cadre, which has certain philosophical underpinnings.
You really think you can get away with this?
That Zanuck thought were distracting and it didn't make sense.
The ladies have outlined their reasons for the takeover, to which Flint replies in part, "I'm sure all of your facts are accurate, but like every other underdog in this world, you know a great deal more about the sickness than you do the cure. What you propose here merely turns the coin over. It's the same old coin. If it's a slug on one side, girls, it's a slug on the other. Now forget it." Dick Zanuck was not happy with this speech. He felt it was almost like it was preaching an intellectual message to the audiences, and he didn't want it in. And so what you see in the final film is a cut to just Flint saying,
Forget it.
Forget it!
and that's it. Saul David was really livid at this. This was the reason he wanted to make films. He was able to put some of these intellectual ideas into them, and with just a quick cut, all of that was gone.
And finally, the film at Fade Out had a punchline Saul David loved.
Flint! Flint! Are you all right?
Lee Jacobs' character is calling out, Flint, Flint, and asking, what have you learned?
At which point Flint was to have responded, I've learned that men and women are not brothers.
Coburn, with that crocodile smile, could have pulled off men and women are not brothers, and it would have been a laugh line. But when Richard Zanuck saw the final cut, he turned to Saul David and said, what the hell is that?
Saul David absolutely loved this line, and to the day he died, he loved this line. He compared it to the great final zinger in Billy Wilder's classic film, Some Like It Hot, which was Nobody's Perfect. And he thought it was along those lines. He thought it was that good.
Richard Zanuck had no idea what the line meant and ordered it to be cut.
Didn't fit into the picture, he thought. And that was the breaking point. That's where Saul David finally threw up his hands and said, 20th and I, we just don't see things the same way. That was Saul David's strength and his Achilles heel. At the time, Fox had a somewhat self-aggrandizing promotional scheme titled Think 20th. Saul David knew his days were numbered and began daydreaming about the idea of putting a comma between Think and 20th so that it would read Think 20th. Became obsessed with the idea, made commas at home in his home workshop.
But he couldn't find anything that could get these to stick to the wall. He tried lighter and lighter woods, he tried balsa wood, he eventually tried styrofoam. Still couldn't get them to stick to the wall.
When the film premiered, and there was a hint of a couple of reviews not being positive,
Saul David basically goes ballistic, and he does something that no good company man would ever do. He goes to his friend Arthur Knight, who is a journalist writing for the Saturday Review, and he tells him about how basically the head of the studio has ruined his picture.
He sends Arthur Knight the script pages with the cuts in them.
Script pages that showed what the dialogue should have been.
Arthur Knight, who promptly published a story called The Missing 3 Minutes.
Arthur Knight paints the faceless Fox executives against the noble intellectual producer, Saul David.
Watch me very carefully, Lloyd. You've been trying to kill the ball.
In the film, of course, Lloyd Cramden is timing the president's golf swing, and a swing that he remembers as happening in mere seconds. It takes over 3 minutes to occur. There seems to be something going wrong. 3 minutes appear to be missing. Well, Arthur Knight entitled his column The Missing 3 Minutes, referring to the content that Richard Zanuck had forced to be cut from the movie.
Someone from the studio reads this to Richard Zanuck over the phone, and Saul David is promptly asked to be off the Fox lot by Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock.
On his last day at the studio, he realized there was no way he was going to get an opportunity to actually place the comma on the sign as he had hoped. But on his way out of the studio,
the door opens and out steps Tony Hope, who's the head of business affairs at 20th Century Fox, who also happens to be the son of Bob Hope. And Tony Hope says,
"Hey Saul, give me the comma." What comma? Come on. Saul, everybody knows.
Give it to me, I'll get it done, I'll get it done.
Saul looks around, gives him the comma, drives off the lot for the last time. He never got an opportunity to actually see it in place, but someone sent him a very nice photograph.
Saying, it was only up for half the day, everybody knew who did it.
One of them saw it, and it was immediately taken down. But it was up.
And that was his last little jab at Fox, the organization.
Coburn had it.
He felt that he was going to get there, all the way up.
He enjoyed putting his talent and himself out on a limb.
Once he did the film, he didn't think about it again.
If there was a good time to be had, he was there.
He was a searcher, He was open, he was interested. He was very American, you know. He was born in Nebraska. He was really the son of his parents. In some ways, he was just really an ordinary kind of guy.
James Coburn's background was actually in improv comedy. When he was in college, he did a lot of comedy shows, and right after college, he was part of an improv comic group.
Jim and I went to college together, and as a matter of one point when I was directing, he had played Henry VIII for me in a play.
He had to sing. It was a musical version, and my dad could not sing. And when he tried, he sounded like Minnie Mouse when he sang. As he got older, his lower range developed more, but in those days he had a very odd voice, and it was incredibly humiliating to him. When he discussed it with Luther Adler, Stella Adler's brother, Luther Adler told him that you have the right to be bad. That's how, if you don't take chances and you don't fail, then you don't learn as an actor and grow.
He certainly wanted to be a star, but it was a long path getting there.
He was doing a play, I think it was Billy Budd with Vincent Price. He fell through the floorboards in the middle of the play and was stuck and had to perform the rest of his scene with half of him sticking out of the floorboards. I think when you go through things like that, I think you learn that you've got to give up the ego or you won't survive it.
He began working in television as a bit player, working up in that field.
When he got into the movies initially, he was always in supporting roles, and he really honed his craft and became recognized as one of the top character actors in Hollywood.
He did Charade with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn. He was a heavy. He was in, of course, The Magnificent Seven as the knife thrower. He's been around Hollywood. Everyone knows his face, but no one knows if he can carry a movie. But he's a really unique personality that fits really nicely with Saul David's view of Flint as the individualist.
He has a kind of sarcastic, almost contemptuous attitude about him that he had developed in other roles, but that plays out very well in the Derek Flint kind of character.
And he was simply perfect for being aloof, tell you anything he wants. Any woman would go for him because in his head, he knew there's no woman who can turn me down.
The Flint movies gave him the opportunity to really stretch his comic muscles again. This is a guy who can pull off a scene like the one where he puts on a cloth towel turban and shoots a gun up in the air as a mad Arab prince.
Coburn's ability with comedy was akin to his ability with drama. It was a Coburn performance, and it was nothing you were going to confuse with anyone else.
He walks like a panther and has this physicality about him that you can tell that this guy is capable of the things that Derek Flint does.
He studied under Bruce Lee and always spoke incredibly highly of Lee as a martial artist, someone who sculpted his body into a living work of art. And his admiration for Bruce Lee extended throughout his life.
And in fact, he does a lot of his own fighting. There was a great stunt team involved, but there's a lot of fights where you can tell that this is James Coburn doing his own fighting.
He did yoga. He played the gong on the Tonight Show.
James Coburn was really into the youth culture at the time. He was in his late 30s already, but he would use words like way out and groovy and where it's at. And really, Coburn was where it's at.
He was in himself a real individualist. And so those sort of quirky, eccentric elements that he brought to Flint finally pulled all of those other elements together so that Flint is the most accomplished, self-made man on the planet.
This last year's book is already out of date.
How do you find time to read?
No, I wrote that.
When he becomes a star, you can see him begin to assert himself even more, to go for the kinds of roles that he's more interested in, even if they're very offbeat kinds of roles and not the sort of roles that you would think somebody who has now become a star would take on in order to kind of protect his position within the Hollywood star hierarchy.
Coburn is definitely someone who marches to the beat of his own drum in Hollywood.
Back during the production of Charade, Coburn's friend Peter Stone initially introduced him to Theodore Flicker, the author of The President's Analyst. By the time Coburn was in the position where he had some power to produce, President's Analyst was the first project that he went to.
The Flint film gave him the power to choose projects to make The President's Analyst, which was his production company that did it.
Coburn is the perfect star for that film. Coming off of the Flint movies, that identity comes with him. So when you're getting into an anti-counter-spy parody, Coburn is your man. He's the perfect person to deconstruct the character that he had created.
He also turned up as a spy in the Internecine Project, where he played an agent who needed to remove all his past bad deeds and calculated a way to get his enemies and associates to kill each other.
My dad was pretty funny. When he worked on a film, that was his focus. When he was preparing for Cross of Iron, for a year we worked on his German accent. For a year I lived with a man telling me to turn off the lights. That was really rather unpleasant for that year.
I always had, and I think many other people did as well, the feeling that, you know, you were just about to see somebody really take off. Coburn had that quality inherently, aside from what he did as an actor. His curiosity, his interest in everything and anything.
My parents were always trying something new. There was either they'd be chanting, Tai Chi in the backyard, pyramid power in the house.
Coburn himself used LSD before, as Time magazine put it, it became popular.
He tried lots of things, but what it came down to for him, his real love was acting. As long as he could work, he was happy, and that's really what he was about.
He was always testing. He was always pushing everyone to their limits, to be the best of what they were. It was an obsession for him to be the best and to try to enjoy life to the fullest. He drove fast, he lived fast.
He thought from his behavior that stop signs were a waste of time and not really there for him.
Hilly would drive up in the front with Jim because his wife would scream all the way through.
And because of his relationship with the neighboring police force, they never stopped him.
He loved a good cigar and grappa. That was his favorite drink.
He was the kind of guy who learned from every experience and utilized every experience to add more dimension to what he brought to the screen.
One of the sad things about his career is that in the 70s he developed arthritis really badly, and that basically took one of the major components out of his acting arsenal, which was his ability to use his body in ways that most actors, other actors, could not.
He tried everything. He was very careful with his diet. He did a lot of things and was able to and exercised a tremendous amount. My dad could outwalk me anywhere. He would go on hikes twice a week. He was amazing that way, but he was in a great deal of pain.
One of the stories that he tells is that he was with Bruce Lee in Japan, and they went up to this high Buddha. He was friends with the Dalai Lama, and he went up to this high priest and who was a doctor, and he said, "I could get rid of your arthritis for you, but I need you for 3 weeks." And Jim said, "I'm an actor. I don't have 3 weeks to sit up in a mountain somewhere." And he laughed about that story later on. He would think, 3 weeks when I went through 30 years of this, all I had to give up. But I wouldn't give it up because I was an actor and the show had to go on.
It's like when Sammy Davis was ill and had cancer of the throat and couldn't sing. As he was unable to really use his limbs in the way he had earlier, he was very depressed and very down. He ultimately became involved with Dr. Ronald Lawrence, who treated him and who got him out of bed and and off his back and on his feet.
During the filming of Affliction, his doctor sent him up a bag of MSM, which is a nutritional sulfur compound, which within 3 days took away all of his pain. He woke up on the 3rd day completely pain-free. It changed his life.
Paul Schrader said, look, Jim, I know your voice, and I know you get away with a lot of things, and you get a lot of people intimidated with that deep voice of yours. So what I want you to do is I want you to speak in a higher octave through rehearsal to allow your vulnerability to come in.
There was a lot of conversation about, you know, an Academy Award-winning performance, which Jim didn't buy into or have anything to do with. And I said to him, I said, I think you got a shot.
He said, Hilly, give up already, stop it. And we went, Jim, you're going to win an Academy Award. And he went, no, I'm not. It was a great performance, but forget about it.
The night of the awards, we accompanied Jim and Paula.
We were late getting to the theater. And he went through the line, and they said to him, Jim, have you ever won an award before? He said, no, I've never been nominated. I've never gotten an award. This is such nonsense for me. And he went down the aisle, and he just sat in his seat, and boom, they called his name. And he was like so thrown by it.
When they called his name, we ran around screaming like idiots. We were in the backyard flapping our arms and howling. It was very exciting.
That he would, at 70 years old, win his first award after doing 100 movies.
He tried to play cool, but he couldn't hide that one. He was thrilled. He was really, really delighted. I think that was one of the happiest times of his life in a lot of ways.
Coburn's work in Affliction is excellent, and he certainly deserved the award, but he also deserved the award for all of the great performances that he had given up to that point.
Each of those performances would not have been as memorable had they not been played by James Coburn.
Getting the recognition from your peers that you're respected for your work, which is all he'd ever really cared about, had to have been one of the best things that ever happened to him. He was thrilled. He was grinning for weeks.
It's also terrific that he did the voice work in Monsters, Inc.
Voicing cartoon characters is a very long and somewhat tedious job.
I mean, when Pixar called him to play this character, he had a great time doing it.
And I think he did it marvelously and was recognized for doing so.
He was so proud of doing the Disney movies, doing Monsters, Inc. and doing Snow Dogs. He made me bring my son to the openings, to the premieres of those things. He was really proud of that. I think at the end of his career, Man from Elysian Fields, American Gun, which was his final film, he had a ball. He was thrilled. He just loved to work.
Everybody that understood the art of making film, understood Jim, understood his love of it, knew that a piece of Hollywood was really leaving when he died.
One takes for granted the qualities of a friend over that period of time and when you spend that much time together. But I adored James from beginning to end, based on his inquisitive nature, his great good humor, and his basic charm.
He would be laughing at us doing all of this stuff. He would. It's move on, next. He was not. He was about living in the present. Yeah. So this is for us.
I adore your song.